Feeling stuck or unfulfilled? Searching for more meaning in your work and life? Wondering what's next? You're not alone, and you're in the right place. This is Focus on Why, the podcast that turns reflection into action. I'm Amy Rowlandson, and each week I dive deep with guests who've chosen to live and work with purpose. Together we explore what drives them, shapes their decisions, and gives their life meaning. Through real stories and honest conversations, you'll discover how to gain clarity, make confident choices, and create a life that truly matters. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Do you understand the power of a focus on why in business? Are your people truly engaged and finding meaning in their work? I deliver practical, interactive workshops that boost engagement, fulfillment, well-being, and purpose, all key drivers of higher productivity and performance. If you're ready to close your purpose gaps, reach out via the link in the show notes today. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Ingrid Pope. Ingrid, hello, welcome.
Hi. Hello. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And what is it you're focusing on right now?
So, my big focus at the moment is promoting my book because it's the result of work that I've been doing for a long time. And that at some point was a training program because I felt I wanted some way of taking this material to people, and then thought, but that's such a small group of people who come through my training program, and that's a shame. And I'd love for it to be able to reach a broader audience, so I decided I would put it into a book. And so that was published a few months ago, and that's hugely exciting. And so now it feels like a lot of what I do revolves around that. And when I say book promotion, what that really means is promoting the work that I do and the thinking that I do and that's compiled in that book around my topic of interest that I feel is so needed at the moment, which is all around creating space. And I talk about space in a number of different ways. I use the terminology of decluttering, but of course, using that word takes us straight to a messy house. And that is a big part of it, but it also goes to a messy mind and an overloaded mind, and equally, perhaps sometimes slightly messy emotions, and living with those well and becoming familiar with those. So that's my focus at the moment.
And it sounds like it's been your focus for a long time. Yes, the actual book promotion is enhancing your focus on it, but this
Yeah.
has been work that has been current in your how long?
About 11 years now. Actually, that's when I moved into this direction.
Now, often a focus or a topic or a theme that we spend so much time on is something that we need for ourselves.
Mm.
Was that how it started for you?
Um, in a way, yes. And it didn't go from a, oh, I have too much stuff, I need to do something about that. It was more a realization of I was moving away from a corporate job, which meant that I suddenly had some freedom around discovering what I was actually interested in life. I fell into a job which suited me really well for a long time, but at some point I thought, well, actually, is this what my life's going to be about? And I thought, well, maybe not. And so there was an opportunity to rethink that. And then got to a point, and I think a lot of people go through that. It's like, oh, well, if I don't want this, what do I want instead? And I had a bit of that. So this became something that I had always had an interest in, and noticed that what maybe was quite easy for me, I have a fairly analytical brain. That's why I had a career in IT, and that I'm always more of a kind of logic and numbers person. So for me, looking at a big stack of stuff and saying, oh, well, all the pens go into a pen box and all the books go onto the bookshelf. That to me is really easy and a bit of time, but In terms of process, there wasn't any difficulty around that, but noticing that other people did have a difficulty around that and couldn't see that quite as straightforward, kind of common sense, fairly obvious. There I thought, that that's interesting. And noticing the effect on people when they did have that really messy spare room and no idea of how to tackle that, what that meant for them to have a space like that in their home and helping them. And for me, finding that real fun and it being really quite transformational for others for whom it was not fun or not easy or not obvious. So it was more a noticing of what's important to me and how when other people didn't have that, the effect that that had on them and thinking, I'd love to be able to help you to do that because I really enjoy that. And look at how great this is going to be for you once it's done. And that's where it started. So the focus at the beginning was around the messy rooms and the we have too much. And also, then I was talking about how I'd spent a fair number of years in a corporate world and noticing over time also how though that environment, well, those environments, because I was in different places, so those environments changed and the world around us changed and became far more digital and faster paced. And so this idea of we have too much and we don't know how to sort it out and deal with it for me then became it's not just physical stuff that we have too much of, it's also stuff we're having to carry in our minds and to keep straight and make sense of, and on the back of that make really good business decisions with. And that's where I was seeing a lot of this stuff falling over in a business context and setting, and a lot of decisions being made in ways that didn't allow for the time and the headspace to actually absorb and process all the information that would be required to be absorbed and processed in order to come up with what is actually the right strategic decision now to be made. And so, kind of sitting back and looking at that and thinking, well, that's not great. And I wonder what that's about. And some coaching work then that I did and trained and became a coach, then also exposed me to this whole. And it's funny that that's what it took for me to feel like I could face my emotions. And I think certainly in the work that I've been doing since, and also what you watch, everybody you see on TV who cries, like, I'm so sorry, I promised myself I wasn't going to cry. And I think, and what's that about? Why? What are we trying to suppress all the time? And how interesting, because of course our emotions drive everything.
So it was only when you became a coach that you were able to feel like you could face your emotions. And so then when you're witnessing something on TV, maybe they haven't had coaching.
Precisely, and what interests me is, and certainly, and I noticed that in myself and saw that in myself, to think, well, it's- I guess I didn't have the opportunity to learn about emotions, and I suppose does that have to do with society? Does that have to do with the family setting? Whatever, and maybe culturally as well. But it felt very much, and it still does feel like emotions are those things that we shouldn't show too much. Let's not show a vulnerability because god forbid we're not heroes, or and I'm going to say something maybe slightly controversial out loud, which is we talk about leadership and we love talking about the authentic leader, and I'm not completely sure about that in the sense of this whole bringing your whole self to work and deciding how we show up. And I think emotions have a place and are really valuable and important to be embraced personally. And then a decision being applied, perhaps, in what we then do with that information. I now often say in my coaching, it's just data. Let's just explore this. It's just data, and then we can choose what we do with that. And I maybe then would choose not to put everything on display in a setting that perhaps isn't suitable for that. So, yeah, I think we're certainly in a place where we talk about emotions much more, and Brené Brown talks about, vulnerability a lot, and that it's absolutely a part of what makes us whole and who we are. But I don't feel like there's still all that much, I'm going to say maybe emotional intelligence around. And what I mean by that is not being very clever necessarily, but just accepting and handling, I want to say handling emotions elegantly. And of course, that can be hard. And when emotions are high and, high intensity and maybe on the negative end of the scale, being shouted at doesn't help being calm and dealing with that very well. But it feels like we could do so much better, maybe as a society in the world, if we engaged with our emotions a little bit more.
What I'm hearing here is the controversial opinion that you're bringing is not that people need to bring their whole self and display their emotions outwardly, that they are able to understand and deal with them personally better first before just sort of vomiting them out over everybody else.
Precisely. Yes. And it's all about self awareness. And I guess that's partly what obviously the coaching work is about. But equally, I feel like that's what maybe a healthy going through life is about. We talk about being more mature and being able to deal with things better when we hit certain ages and things. And to me, that's really quite a big part of it.
What I've heard also is the word notice.
Mm.
And it's come up a lot in regards to what you have noticed. You've noticed what's important, you've noticed the effects, you've noticed difficulties that people have experienced, you've noticed different environments that have changed, you've noticed differences in yourself. And this noticing hasn't just been through interest and curiosity, it's actually been taken a step further to affecting change
Mm.
for others.
Yes, I feel quite strongly about that. I feel quite strongly that it's all well and good sitting at your kitchen table and moaning about stuff, but really that's not acceptable unless you're going to do something about it. So I'm not suggesting that everything I notice and I decide I want to do something about is stuff I feel I need to moan about. But this started with a massive community project actually years and years ago that I set up in our town here where we live in Tunbridge Wells, where I thought, oh, Tunbridge Wells needs this event. We'd seen this on our travels in the States and thought, oh, that's brilliant. A yard sale all over town. How cool. And I thought, let's do this. So we did. And on the day, I remember walking through town with my husband and thinking, oh my gosh, we have about 150 people who've set up stalls outside of their homes. And if it hadn't been for what we had done, this wouldn't be happening right now. And that was quite a moment because that really showed what you can achieve if you set your mind to something. Another thing I learned then is that the level of success is directly proportionate to the amount of effort you put in. So however many hours we spent leafleting, that is how successful it was going to be. And that actually I've carried with me a lot. That little lesson. But it is this sense of you can do stuff in the world. You have power in the world. And it can be easy, I think, to feel like maybe that's not the case because might feel like you're a bit removed. And how do you even start? And everything can feel really quite overwhelming, especially if you feel quite strongly about something that maybe you don't know that much about, or you don't know what the system is or how it's structured and where you even start by making a difference in whatever area you feel strongly about. Yet you can just do one little thing, and that can maybe lead to another thing. And if you don't know what little thing to do, have a little conversation because it's also quite amazing what happens when you start saying things out loud and how willing people are to help or how interested other people are. So, putting things out in the world through your voice can also be quite powerful.
And this strong feeling that you have about taking action, not just
Mm,
sitting at your table, kitchen table, and moaning about it. I use this as an exercise of somebody when I hear someone saying somebody really should do something about, I flip it and say, okay, so what is it you're going to do about that?
yeah.
Okay, because obviously it matters. And that's the point. So when something matters enough to even say that, to articulate it out loud, it's giving you so much insight in what really matters to you.
Mm.
So somebody should really do something about the mess, the messy minds, the decluttering of the mental state, and freeing this mental liberation that I call is essentially, I think, what you're talking about, to free yourself from holding yourself prisoner, because that's what we do through all these limitations. What is it that has been the overriding purpose throughout here, all of this for you?
Mm. So, I think the overriding purpose here has been to just feel like I'm intentional in how I do things and how I choose to spend my time and my really valuable mental power. And I say really valuable not because it's better than anybody else's, but because it's finite. And if we don't pay attention, then it's grabbed by a million distractions that are thrown at us. And so, also as you age, I keep saying, I this is the second time I've mentioned age, and I want to think I'm not that old at all. But as you go through life, you observe and notice how maybe other people fall ill or you start losing people at a certain point, and it makes you just, it gives a bit of a jolt to say, hang on a minute, what am I spending my valuable, precious time on earth on? I mean, I guess for me, that also came in a slightly different form of near total burnout in a work situation, to think there has got to be more to life. What's the purpose of all of this that I'm doing? And I remember quite clearly, so this is a while ago when I was still commuting into an office, wild, every day, every morning. And I had this image in my mind of all these little ants going to the ant house and going and doing all this busy work and then going home again. And all these little ants coming back to this big ant hill and doing their today's work and then going home and thinking, and what is the point of all of this? Thinking so somebody somewhere can get a bit richer. I mean, yes, the company manufactured products that were useful to people so people could buy these products, but still, you felt like such a tiny cog. And just a sense of, well, what am I here to do? How do I want to spend my time here? And come the end, how do I want to look back on that? And is it being really busy, getting paid lots of money, spending a lot of time on my inbox and on a phone? And maybe that's somebody's choice, and there's no judgment attached to that, but make it a choice. And to me, that's, I think, the biggest piece around, I guess, purpose, which is, well, be intentional, make everything a choice in your life of what you do, how you organize yourself. And maybe sometimes you are, of course, in situations that are a bit tricky and that you can't just decide you're going to pack everything in and go and live on a boat for 5 years. That might not be practical, and that's okay. So choose what it is that you are doing And then you approach it differently also. You don't hate every day of it because you're choosing it because it's providing you with the income that you need to support the family or whatever, whatever. But then that also feels very different to I have to do this and I hate my life and I'm stressed.
Having these intentional choices,
Mm.
or the ability to have these intentional choices for you, what does that give you, Ingrid?
That gives me such inner peace. And after I left sort of the corporate world, about a year later, I remember sitting on a train saying to my husband, wow, nothing hurts anymore. And then realizing, oh, wow, I'd had painful shoulders and back and neck for years and years and years and years and years. And what living with purpose and intention gives me is that I don't have that anymore. I get to live pain free. How magical is that? Most days I get to wake up without an alarm. And that to me is the biggest joy in life.
And that's because
That's because I'm not a morning person.
oh, I love that answer. That's brilliant. I was expecting you to say something else. That was hilarious. So,
Sorry, did you want something
no,
with a bit more depth?
that is brilliant. It's truth. And what I've heard throughout what you've shared, I've just been jotting down some of the values that have come through here. And we've got creating space, obviously, there's that. We've got freedom, discovery, opportunity, intention, self awareness, intelligence, elegance, community, effort, making sense, inner peace, intentional choices, magic. Sounds like a great life to me.
It is. I can confirm that.
What stands out for you from those that I just shared?
Mm, a lightness. And I'm glad that the word effort is in there because that it none of this is about sitting back and doing nothing because that isn't my ambition either. I want to do stuff. As we started this conversation around, well, what is it that I'm focusing on right now? There's work to be done around promoting my book and stuff. So that is effort, as you could say. And is it all fun? Not all of it, and that's okay. And yet I still happily do it. And I think one of the big things we haven't talked about that yet, the when we talk about all this mental stuff that we're carrying, the way I like to talk about that is that I break that out into two different categories. I break that out into the stuff that comes at us from the outside. So that's the deluge of data, of news, of distractions, everything that's prompted from the outside. And on the other hand, I look at all of this stuff that we create ourselves because we're great at generating a lot of mental clutter for ourselves without any extra help, be that stories we tell ourselves or maybe all our biases and the ways that we decide to see the world and also maybe how we choose to engage with all the stuff that comes at us from the outside world. And so one of my little pieces of clutter that I was carrying was a little story or a little voice that I kept having, which kept saying to me, should be doing a little bit more, should be doing that LinkedIn post, should be working harder. What do you mean you're just sitting here on your backside on the sofa reading a book? You should be doing all this other stuff. And I remember sitting at that famous kitchen table and feeling a little bit stressy and a little bit dissatisfied and not on top of the world and thinking, what's that about? This whole let me engage with my emotions and get a sense of what's happening here rather than just carrying that. Thinking, what is that? And then I realized it's just something I'm making up because Nobody else is telling me that I'm not doing well enough. Nobody else is telling me I should be doing all this other stuff. And I realized that a lot of when I wasn't feeling great, it was me creating that for myself. And you know what? There and then I decided I'm just not going to do that anymore. So I've stopped doing that. And that's joyful.
I'm not surprised. Has any voice replaced that space at all?
Mm, good question. No, it wasn't like there was a void that needed filling. It was just a relief. Ah, space,
Creating space
creating
in
space.
practice. There we
Mm-hmm.
go. You mentioned earlier about all of these emotions that they have their place. They're really valuable and it's important to embrace them personally and that they're just data. And it's true. It's important information that in the moment, this is the emotion that's come out. And then it's up to you whether you choose to take that emotion or whether you choose to create a different story. That was the initial reaction, but it doesn't have to be the one that you hold on to, right? You have a choice. Tell me about this data that we're given and how in your work you help people to process it.
Mm, yes. So often emotions show up when we react to situations. So there's some external trigger of some sort, a conversation, a person, a meeting, a tone, an email, something that will generate something for us. The interesting thing with emotions is also that that might not always happen at the same time with the same person after the same conversation. So then maybe sometimes we lash out, whereas normally we wouldn't have lashed out. So that in itself is a piece of data to say, huh, what's going on for me that at right now or when this happened this morning or yesterday, generally a little bit of time distance is useful for just this sort of processing work. Think, huh, what was going on for me that normally I can deal with this slightly tricky colleague just fine, but I couldn't yesterday or something happened. So what's that about? And that then comes into, well, how am I generally? How well resourced am I generally? This comes out quite a lot when I'm working with leaders. And of course, they love to suppress all their emotions because emotions don't belong in the workplace. So they get put away. And that's all well and good, all the while we're well rested and we're fully resourced to put some of our valuable energy into keeping that box shut. Now, when we, however, become slightly stressed and we are maybe a little bit sleep deprived because we're not sleeping all that great and we haven't eaten very well and we're running maybe on caffeine a little bit and we're a little bit depleted from a resource perspective, maybe we do not have that little bit of extra energy left to keep that lid on that box because that costs energy. And so that's when this box is going to start leaking and blowing up. And then that person might say, what's going on with me? And why am I operating in this way? Well, because there's stuff there. And I'm not suggesting we have to look at all of that all the time. And also, we might not necessarily know what it is or be able to name or label these emotions very clearly, but we need to get a sense of what's happening for us because otherwise we act out in ways that feel out of control, and that is not a nice place to be. So it's when we know for ourselves how we're showing up. And quite often also I have people who come to me for coaching and they say, I want to show up and be my best self. And I know I'm not in certain situations, either because my confidence is knocked and I'm not showing up really well in these meetings that matter where I'm perhaps deputizing for somebody at a more senior level and I want people to see me differently. And there are situations when I am really confident. And so what's going on for me there? And so there's all manner of stuff. Confidence is a big thing that comes up quite often. And then all manner of stories we love to tell ourselves. And so it's understanding, okay, well, what is it about this situation? What is it about you? What is it like when you are really confident? Like we can then start working with that when we are willing to accept that we have got stuff that's going on. When we're resourced, and that is a really important piece, when we do have the headspace and the kind of emotional capacity to look inwards and do so in a safe space because that can be really exposing. So people might not necessarily have anyone else that they can talk about this type of stuff openly because they feel judged and they might feel like people are going to think of them slightly differently. But that's what I mean by data and showing up and being able to engage with stuff that feels a bit messy and feels out of control. And by actually creating that space to think about that and process it, sometimes actually it's really insightful. And when we know what's going on, then we can decide how are we going to deal with that.
Ingrid, you opened the conversation by talking about the book
Yep.
and how you are creating space.
Yeah.
But the book is not called Creating Space.
No,
You chose a different title,
I did.
even though it had connotations to messy house. What was your decision around choosing that title?
So the selection of the title was quite a process. And I went through a bunch of different options with the publisher. And that in itself was really valuable to go through all these. What could it be? Is there an action verb creating space that's kind of action driven? And in the end, I chose this came to me one evening. I do my best thinking at night just before I go to sleep. So in bed. I guess that's when I have the most kind of peace of mind. The day's done. That's when the mind doesn't have to worry about the next thing, the next call. What am I going to do? How am I going to plan this thing, that thing? That's when I'm really creative. And that's when it came to me. And I settled on uncluttered, which is just simple and which describes the end state and the state that I aspire to stay in as much as I can.
And then the subtitle, what was that?
So the subtitle is How to Create Space to Think, Work, and Live. And that was really important to me to one, the book is about how. It's about doing it. It's about creating that space. And it gives tips and a tool in tools and examples and a method to follow that's straightforward so people can be held by the hand and talked through, well, how do I deal with all this stuff? So it's not just about noticing and paying attention and deciding we want to be intentional, but it's actually how do we do that? How do we do that really well? Because maybe they don't know. And also the importance of the how, and then the important piece being, and actually it's not just the messy house, it is at work, just as important at work. It is at home. And it's also within ourselves thinking. So that then hopefully illustrates and gives the readers a bit of a better sense of what to expect, that it's not just about tidying the messy spare room.
Indeed, there's so much more to it. And I know it's only early, but have you had people reach out to you and share what they've done as a result of reading it?
I have actually. I've had people reach out and say, "Gosh, this is exactly what I needed." I think there are several parts to this. There's one, a recognition that this is hard. And I remember one of the very early participants on the training course when so I was running it as a 3-month program, and she was a fairly senior leader in an organization and quite successful at work, yet her house was a mess. And that was really hard for her because there was nowhere she could go talk about that because massive shame attached to it, not letting anybody into her home, feeling bad about herself every time she was at home. And that's not a nice place to be. I talk quite a lot about, well, actually, it's important to have a home that you love being in. I have no opinion around how tidy or neat it needs to be. My home is not a minimalist space. But I'm happy with it. It's fine for me. When it gets to a certain level, then I feel, okay, actually, now it's a bit too messy. Let me do something about that. So it's not about actually the solution is tidiness. It's about it needs to be so that you feel happy in it. Because if our home is where we live, it's, where we rest, where we shield from the world, where we recover, that needs to be a place we love being in, I feel. So that to then think that there it's not that way has impact beyond just the home. So I think this stuff really matters. I really do. And so just also in terms of what I've heard, I have this lovely little story, if I can just share that, where one reader said to me, Ingrid, you wouldn't believe it. We've just had quite a lot of hot weather here. And she said, so I have a friend who was helping declutter somebody's house, and there was a spare pool going and with a working pump. And she said, anybody want it? And it was going for free. She said, if I had not decluttered my garden, I would have not had space for this pool. And she sent me a picture of herself in the pool. Said, I'm loving life. And it's those little things, or somebody sends me a picture and they're on holiday and they say, I can now enjoy being on holiday. I'm truly present for my family, whereas before I wouldn't have been. And those are big things to me. They really are.
Yeah. To be able to feel happy, to have this sense of calm or rest or recovery, or to love life, or to have this presence.
Mm.
And yeah, those are the different outcomes. You're not predicting the outcomes. That's for the individual to choose, but you're just showing the how and creating the need and the why behind it, the work. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing. How might someone say, I need Ingrid Pope in my life? How do they connect with you?
So they can either find me on, well, the various social media platforms. Probably where I'm the most is LinkedIn. So Ingrid Pope, the one with all the flags on LinkedIn, or also creating-space.co on my website. There's a contact form, and I respond. I read everything and I reply.
Good for you. Fantastic. Well, again, thank you for coming on Focus on Why. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you and feeling free from the lightness that you've brought to this conversation has been an absolute delight. Have you got some final words, please, for the listener?
Mm, yeah, be choiceful. Whatever it is that you choose it. Go through life with intention.
That's a wrap for today, but the journey doesn't end here. Share your takeaways, leave a review, or post your insights. Your voice helps others discover the value of these stories. Want to dive deeper into purpose? Check the show notes for ways to work with me. Get a copy of my book or to sign up for Friday Focus, my weekly newsletter packed with clarity and inspiration. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.